Good evening. My story begins in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And if you've never been to Green Bay, it's cold, somewhat like tonight. It's a town of about 150,000 people. It is known for its cheese, for making the vast majority of toilet paper for the United States, and for the Green Bay Packers. They call Green Bay Titletown because of the many championships the football team won in the 60s, and the community takes great pride in that. Different than any other NFL city, Green Bay and the community actually own the football team. So given the size of the city and the fact that the community owns the team touches basically everyone in that small town. And my family was no exception to that. My grandfather was one of the original stockholders for the team. My dad, when he was just graduating from college, needed a summer job and worked at the stadium in construction. My parents' first starter home was 2 blocks away from the Packers stadium. And when I was a little girl, they let me park cars in their driveway during Packer games to make a little extra money. I was a proud graduate of Vincent T. Lombardi Junior High School. And when I was in high school, while my friends were working in the mall or at Orange Julius, I got to work for the Packers Hall of Fame with a pretty spiffy green sweatsuit that I wore to work every day. Growing up in Green Bay, I learned at a very young age the significant role that sport can play in a community. And it certainly laid the foundation for the fact that I grew to love sport. My dad was a high school football coach and a very successful golf coach. And as a teeny little girl, I spent time on football sidelines and learned to play golf, which is something I absolutely love to this day. In high school, I was a golfer, and I also was a synchronized swimmer, replete with the Vaseline on your teeth so you'd smile during your routines. I was a pretty normal kid and had interests like all of my friends, but different than my friends. Instead of being a fan of a rock group or actresses and actors, I was a fan of sport heroes. I had a very glamorous view of what it would like to work in the sports-related world, but in the late 70s, there weren't a lot of women working around sports, and the few that were working as sideline reporters, and they actually were portrayed more as being beauty queens than sports journalists. So if I'm honest, while I thought it would be a really neat career, I was too embarrassed to say that's what I wanted to do. I put it aside as just a childish dream. When it was time to go to college, I wasn't a good enough golfer to get a Division I scholarship, so I chose a school based on its academic reputation, but if I'm honest, sports had a little hook there too. I ended up going to St. Mary's of Notre Dame and also the University of Notre Dame. And similar to Green Bay, Notre Dame has a strong sports tradition, and I learned again just the value of sport in that community. My first week there, I went with a group of friends to the big pep rally for the Notre Dame-Michigan football game. And 2 days later, I went with a crew of friends to see the movie Newt Rockne All-American, because that's what you do there. And I was hooked. I absolutely loved the place. While in school, I wrote a few sports articles for a student publication, and I helped a friend who was working on a women's golf club. But short of that, there'd be nothing that would dictate that I was going to ultimately work in sport. When I graduated undergrad, I stayed in South Bend, and I earned a master's degree in communication arts. Now, this part of the story I haven't told to anyone, probably not even myself, if I'm honest. When I got the degree in communication arts, I still, in the back of my head, had that little girl's dream. What would it be like to be a sport reporter? But I didn't have the courage or the gumption to really go after it. And so while I took a few TV classes, I backed away. And ultimately, after graduating, I ended up going to law school because by the late 80s, that was a very acceptable career path for women. Now, I am somebody that has a pretty big sense of joy for life. And when I started practicing law, I noticed that my sense of love of life had somewhat diminished, and I wasn't having quite as much fun as I thought I would. I told myself that was what it was like to be an adult. I was working at this nice firm. I was very lucky. Suck it up and enjoy your work. Fortunately, at the same time, I was going through a leadership program, similar to what we have here with Leadership Nashville, and I met a classmate of mine by the name of Jim Murphy. Jim was an assistant athletics director at Georgia Tech working in finance. Now, arguably, that's not the most exciting job in the world, but I thought it was the bomb. I thought Jim was a celebrity. At every break or lunch period, I'd find a way to sit next to Jim and talk to him about his job and talk to him about sport. Finally, in the spring of that year, Jim looked at me and said, "Why don't you use your law degree and get a job in intercollegiate athletics? There are lots of people working in sports that have law degrees doing rules compliance." And the light bulb went off. I went back to my 500 square foot little apartment in Atlanta, and it was before the internet, started pulling books and addresses and sending letters crazily to see if I could get a job. Well, I got a call from Paul Houlihan, who was then the athletics director at Vanderbilt. And he invited me for an interview, and he ultimately offered me a job. Now, you think it would have been an easy move to accept the position, but walking away from a law firm, walking away from a career that you had planned for eventually through your education was harder than I'm going to make it sound during the course of this talk. Fortunately, I had a really supportive family. And they said, "Sure, go ahead." And ultimately, I made the decision to leave the law firm and come to Vanderbilt as an assistant athletics director. What I remember most, though, is the absolute joy when I finally made the decision to make the move. I remember telling people with such excitement that I was going to work in intercollegiate athletics. Not to brag about the situation, but I really felt it in my heart. I was so very excited. A lot of time has changed since I took that first job at Vanderbilt. There have been a lot of miles and a lot of long hours. But I still have that same sense of joy I had so many years ago when I accepted that position. I have been really blessed in the world of Division I athletics to work at some of the absolute best places and from some of the most powerful people in our industry. From Vanderbilt to the Southeastern Conference to the NCAA and now the Ohio Valley Conference. I have been truly blessed. And one of the ways I've been blessed is at every stop there was a woman older than I was who had fought the Title IX battles of implementation who was there in the background. Now, truthfully, none of those women were necessarily my role model, and they certainly weren't my boss. They were my coworkers, but they were also my champions and gave me great support. So June Stewart at Vanderbilt, Pat Wall at the Southeastern Conference, and Judy Sweet at the NCAA have my undying gratitude for their support and their willingness to push that next generation of women forward. Now, all my bosses in intercollegiate athletics ended up being men. And I was fortunate in that they were good men, but also powerful men in the industry. David Burst, the Vice President of Enforcement at the NCAA, and Roy Kramer, the Commissioner of the Southeastern Conference. If they saw my gender as an impediment, I certainly didn't know it. They let me shine and were excellent role models for me. But what is interesting about all of this, and it isn't all that long ago, is while they were supportive of me, we never talked about career aspirations and what was next. At that stage, I was working in athletics, and as a female, I was just happy to be there, and I don't think they expected much more either. So around 2008, as I'm working at the NCAA, I work for a number of the presidents. I get approached by a few university presidents who represent different athletics conferences. and ask independently, do you know anyone that would be interested in applying for a commissioner's job? I dutifully went through my list of guy friends who I thought would be good and passed over a list of people that I thought would be terrific being a Division I commissioner. Now, before you think I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, you also need to understand that at that time, of the 32 Division I conferences, there were 2 female commissioners, and I think historically there had only been 3. It just wasn't in my frame of reference that a woman could get a commissioner's job. Now, the good news to the story is 2 hires happened right after one another, and in both instances, females were hired. Well, that certainly was a moment that caught my attention, and I really needed to recalibrate my thoughts. So when the job opened at the Ohio Valley Conference, I was familiar with it, having lived here in Nashville. I knew that the offices were located here in the metropolitan area, that the league had been around for 60-some years at that time, that it was very stable, that it was named after the Ohio River Valley. There are no schools in Ohio, but that it was a good job and a good place to go. So I said yes. But I'm embarrassed to say this now. I talked to the headhunter even at the time to say, I can't be your token interview through this process. I knew that the interview ultimately went fairly well, but I still questioned, would 3 women be hired back-to-back in intercollegiate athletics for the role? So ultimately, on that Sunday evening, when the Board of Presidents called me into the Marriott down at Cool Springs to offer me the job, I was somewhat stunned. And I actually had a decision to make, for I had a really good job in life in Indianapolis working for the NCAA. The chair of the board, President Bob Bell at Tennessee Tech, said to me, please let us know by Tuesday morning. Yes, sir, I will. What I forgot is that we were having an all-staff retreat at the NCAA Tuesday morning. So I went to the staff retreat, and we sat at round tables similar to this room. And I sat there quietly crying with the tears running down my cheeks. I really didn't know what to do. Now, I thought I was cool and had it all together, and I was a little bit taken back when a couple of my friends asked me what in the world was wrong. It was only when I went into the ladies' room at the break and realized I looked like Alice Cooper with my makeup everywhere that I wasn't quite as cool as I thought I was in this decision-making process. So at the break, I went outside, and if you're familiar with Indianapolis, there's a big canal. I sat down at the canal by myself and thought about it. And I thought, I don't have any choice. As a female working in intercollegiate athletics, I will never have a leadership opportunity again if I turn this down. And more importantly, if I turn this down, other women aren't going to have this opportunity either. So the good news to the story is I've ultimately taken the job, and it is truly the right decision for me. I still have that sense of joy. I love our mission and the way we serve. It's probably surprising to some of you, but in the athletics world, there are only about 50 programs in the country that make money on intercollegiate athletics. The vast number of us offer scholarships and offer sport as a way for students to get an education and to learn more about themselves through the competitive experience. And I really love that mission and what we do, working with young people. Now, as a commissioner, my job is to work with university presidents, athletics directors, coaches, faculty, student athlete to help move our league forward. Given the competitive nature and the variety of perspectives on a group of people looking to move an entity forward, this is not an easy job, regardless of my gender. It's fun, but definitely not easy. I do not wake up every morning thinking I'm the female commissioner of the Ohio Valley Conference, the first in our history. But I do wake up realizing, while I'm the commissioner of the Ohio Valley Conference and I have to run this league, I am a female in this role. I've been given a wonderful opportunity, and I have an obligation to be a good role model for our female student athletes, but also for our male student athletes, so they can see what leadership looks like in a different form in intercollegiate athletics. Now, this has been somewhat of a work in progress because I am one of the first that are doing this, and we don't have a lot of role models, and people are typically interested, what's it like? Athletics is in a different spot than a lot of other industries. And by and large, the experience has been very positive. Once our coaches realized I knew what I was talking about and had earned their credibility, my gender no longer matters in the discussion. I have also learned a lot of lessons along the way, and because it's a group of primarily females, I think some of these lessons are going to resonate with you, and I probably learned a few of them the hard way. When I first got the job, it's intercollegiate athletics, I felt like I had to be the old grizzled coach who was leading this league. I had to give the Newt Rockne speech or give the Pat Summitt stare. Well, we just met tonight, but I think you can tell that's really not my style, and it really didn't come across as authentic. So over the years, I've learned I have to be myself in this leadership role, and that's what will ring true to our membership. Stereotypically, I know it's a women's communication style, but I also like to ask questions when I talk to people, both to prove a point and also to get people to think. But working with coaches, I quickly learned that by asking questions, they assumed I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I've had to learn to say, I have a sense of what I want to do with this league. I have a sense of direction, but I benefit from hearing your opinion, so please share it. Additionally, as a female, I'll be honest with you, I still don't feel comfortable at games going into the locker room or kibitzing with a coach immediately before kickoff. It's just not where I want to be. What I have learned, though, is it's also not enough to be competent at your job. You have to make sure that people know you care. So I work very hard to make sure that our membership, especially our coaches and our student athletes, know that I care through this process. So the good news is it's become much more comfortable over the years. What I can share with you, though, is from a general public standpoint, it's a little bit slower reacting. And I know I need to respond when it happens and when there's an opportunity to educate, because making sure that we have role models for our female student athletes is so very important, because we know the positive byproduct for sports for all participants. So I'll give you just a couple of examples of how the general public has responded, because I think they'll give you a smile. I was doing a speaking engagement in Williamson County, and at the end of the talk, an elderly woman came up to me and said, "Darlin', I really wasn't looking forward to your presentation because I thought you'd be a big girl in a sweatsuit, but you actually clean up quite nice, and you seem like you're polite." Thanks, I think. To the gentleman that met me 3 times over the course of a football weekend, and while there was a video of me welcoming everybody to the football stadium, looked at the athletics director that I was talking to and said to him, "That is lovely that your wife likes football that much. She's willing to come to the football game." And then to the national media person who was conducting a halftime interview with me, who forgot to turn off his mic at the end of the interview, who said, "Oh my, she actually knows what she's talking about." So we do have a little work to be done. We especially have work to be done that we need to add more coaches, female coaches, to our ranks. But there's some good news in this story, and I'll quickly share that before I close. There are 351 Division I programs, and right now we have about 30 female athletics directors at the Division I level, including Teresa Phillips, who some of you in this room may know, who's at Tennessee State. Within the commissioner's ranks, since I was hired, 6 more females out of the 32 conferences end up being female commissioners. So we've added to our ranks, and you can see those chips in the glass ceiling breaking, and we are all dear friends. While our schools compete against one another, we are supportive and really cheer one another on. So with that, I am so heartened by the progress that we finally see being made. I'm very humbled that I get to play a really small role in all of that, and I have an immense level of gratitude that I have been able to serve in a way that I truly love and give back, and just am very humbled by the opportunities that I've been given. So thank you for listening to my story, and thank you to the Tennessean for this opportunity.